Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody in between, welcome to another episode of the Bowtell Sports Experience, the podcast that as yet can't be killed. It's been rebooted at least 3 to 4 times. I am joined today by the one and only Mr. David Vaughan, the great Oklahuman. Good to have you back, David.
Man, it's been a minute. It's been, 2 years at least. I'm so glad to be back, though.
Yeah, we're glad to have you back. Good to get you on board for our AFC South division preview today. You and I are going to do the AFC South and the AFC West. Jacko and I did the North and the East last week, so make sure you check those ones out. They're up on YouTube and Spotify, etc. Let's jump into it. There's a lot to get to in these divisions. We're going to start with the AFC South. We're going to start with the Tennessee Titans, and I'll talk about these guys. After a rocky 2022 season, the Tennessee Titans were looking for a turn of fortunes in 2023, but after a 2-2 start to the campaign, they would go on to win just 4 of their final 13 games. That 6-11 record was made all the more untenable by a 1-5 record within their own division, which I'd sort of forgotten about. They were really beaten up by their neighbors as those sort of former division bullies crashed into last place. Coach Mike Vrabel was jettisoned at season's end, unable to hold on to his position after suffering back-to-back losing records. Now, there's been a bit of churn this season on the list. To fill the void left by Mike Vrabel, Tennessee inserts first-time head coach Brian Callahan into the big chair, with the 40-year-old having spent the previous 4 seasons as the offensive coordinator in Cincinnati with the Bengals. In addition to the departure of their head coach, the Titans also see the losses of former starting quarterback Ryan Tannehill to free agency. Believe he's still drifting out there as a free agent, Ryan Tannehill. Future Hall of Fame running back Derrick Henry goes to the Ravens. Offensive tackle Chris Hubbard to San Francisco. Linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair to Houston. And cornerback Sean Murphy-Bunting to the Cardinals. Now, Titans haven't wasted any time splashing some cash around. Incoming a first-round offensive lineman J.C. Latham from Alabama. Former Broncos center Lloyd Cushenberry. Wide receiver pair Calvin Ridley from the Falcons and Tyler Boyd from the Bengals, while former Cowboys running back Tony Pollard arrives to bolster the run game. On defense, Tennessee adds second-round defensive lineman Tavondre Sweat from the Texas Longhorns, former Chargers linebacker Kenneth Murray, Bengals cornerback Chidobe Awuzie, as well as Chiefs cornerback L'Jarius Sneed. Big get there, I reckon. And Seahawks safety Jamal Adams. Now, the big question for me when it comes to the Tennessee Titans, after conducting this research, it was sort of an eye-opener to me in just how much change the Titans were prepared to undertake this past offseason. It's sort of hard to envisage a Tennessee running game without the brute force of Derrick Henry. The receiving weapons around Will Levis on offense look to be much improved from last season. Got DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, and Tyler Boyd. They've got the potential to be an excellent 3-man band at wide receiver. It's going to be interesting to see if the rejigged offensive line can improve on its 2023 form, a campaign in which they surrendered nearly 4 sacks per game. I think there's potential on defense too, particularly if they can get a few more takeaways from their secondary, who were worst in the NFL last season for interceptions. So my biggest question, and no doubt the biggest question for the Titans' top brass, is whether Will Levis can show that he is the man for the job in Tennessee. Levis flashed some brilliant potential in 2023 during the 9 games he played, and with an improved supporting cast and only Mason Rudolph and Malik Willis behind him in the quarterback room, I kind of feel he's got an extremely long leash to prove himself in 2024. It's a massive opportunity for the former Kentucky Wildcat. And to me, it's the biggest question that the Titans will be looking to answer in 2024. So we go from last year's cellar dweller, and I hand the ball off to you, David, to talk about the Houston Texans, your team.
My team. Okay, so I'm not going to be nearly as eloquent as you are, Jake. I have my notes over here, but they're not nearly as eloquent as yours. But yeah, no, the Houston Texans coming off a 10-7 season, and one that I think I feel like by every single measure was a successful year. They in 2022-23 they ended the season 3-13-1, and with new coach DeMeco Ryan, I think that several people, present company included, kind of thought that they were going to be in that same category. I figured they would probably finish around 5-12. I was pretty bearish on them last year. I didn't think they were going to do well at all. But they came in and they started out pretty rough. I think they started off the top of my head. I think they started out 1-3. And then, they just went on the tear. They finished the season 9-4, absolutely smashed Cleveland in the wild card round of the playoff. And, they kind of enjoyed rubbing that one in a little bit, with he who shall not be named now at the helm on the other side, Voldemort over there. And then they fell to Baltimore. No shame in that. They played well. The elements were just against them. It was outdoor, and it was if you remember, it was a close game until the fourth quarter. And in the fourth quarter, it was just too much Lamar Jackson and too much running game, and they just weren't able to sustain that. They did have three Pro Bowlers on that team. Two of those Pro Bowlers were rookies, and C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson. And then, of course, Laramie Tunsil, the beast on the offensive line. And then they had two other players that I could argue were Pro Bowl quality in Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Dell broke his leg at the end of the regular season, but he was well on pace to eclipse 1,000 yards. Nico Collins did, in fact, eclipse 1,000 yards. C.J. Stroud, my God, what more can you say? 4,100 yards, 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Didn't throw his first interception until week 13.
Yeah,
it was an unbelievable rookie campaign for him. Where I look at Houston this year, and I just kind of have to shake my head a little bit, is they did nothing to bolster their offensive line. And that was already their weakness, and they didn't do anything to help themselves there. So it does kind of bring into question, okay, will sophomore CJ Stroud be as agile as freshman CJ Stroud, or rookie CJ Stroud, rather? They did improve at the running back position, much to my chagrin. And you and I have talked about this previously. I think we even talked about it a few years ago. I'm just not a Joe Mixon fan. I'm just not a fan of Joe Mixon, but he is an improvement over Singletary. And so that is going to bring, that's going to bring some fresh blood. It's going to bring a really kind of a power exclamation point running back in that they haven't had since Arian Foster. And so, and they're very different kinds of running backs. So it's not like, he's an Arian Foster type, but he's going to bring that kind of impact. I do want to take a second though and talk about the Texans receiving core. Holy cow. They were already deep, and then they picked up Stephon Diggs from Buffalo. Yep. And I'm like, it's almost an embarrassment of riches. And so now it's like, if they can give CJ Stroud any time at all, I think you seriously have to start looking at this Houston Texans team and thinking, could this be a Super Bowl contender? And I think if they can get their offensive line in shape, I think the answer is an unequivocal yes. I think they're Super Bowl contenders this year. They did sign Danielle Hunter. And I'm pretty sure that's why Jack is sick, was because he didn't want to have to hear that from me. Signing Danielle Hunter from Minnesota, coming over to Houston. And so pairing him with Will Anderson on that defensive side, that's gonna be tough. That's gonna be tough. they made terrific moves defensively. I mean, they bolstered their secondary, their defensive line. I mean, they did very well. I initially, like, my initial thought when I look at this Texans team, when I kind of started putting my notes together, I was thinking, oh, this is a 12-5 team. Looking at it now, they could go as high. I think their ceiling is 14-3. I mean, this is a good team. And you and I were talking about it earlier, I think earlier even today. They lost a lot, but they picked up a lot. They lost a lot of talent, but they didn't lose any quality at all. And so, like, I'm excited about this Houston team this year. I think that they've got a chance to make a really deep run. And I do try and kind of put my homerism away when it comes to Houston. But I think that I think this team is a legitimate Super Bowl contender. I do.
Yeah, look, I think it's probably hard to argue, really. Like, and as you said, like, the things that they lost in terms of they gained back. They lost Jonathan Grenard and Blake Cashman, but they bring in, as you said, Hunter from Minnesota had 16.5 sacks. They bring in Azeez Al-Shaair, who we just talked about with the Titans. So, no, I agree with you. And as you said, there's sort of that question over the offensive line. But, even what CJ Stroud was able to do last year, even given he didn't get great offensive line play, sort of gives you a bit of hope with the extra weapons too.
Right. Well, and looking at that offensive line, it's not that they were bad last year. They were just young. And now they've got more experience behind them, and they stayed relatively healthy. Houston kind of got hit pretty hard by the injury bug there toward the end of the season, but their offensive line, they used a lot of younger, because the offensive line, if you remember, was injured pretty bad at the beginning of the season. And so this younger talent, then, they kind of got thrown into the fire, and they performed well enough. And that's the thing to keep is they performed well enough to win the AFC South last year.
Yeah.
And I think they're only going to be better from here.
Well, speaking of winning the AFC South, there's another team who, I don't know if they made as many moves as the Titans did in the offseason, but I like what they've got at quarterback if he stays healthy. That's the Indianapolis Colts. A few people had high expectations of first-year head coach Shane Steichen, but the former Eagles OC wasted no time in exceeding that low bar. It led the Indianapolis Colts to a 9-8 campaign. It included impressive victories over the Texans in Houston and the Ravens in Baltimore. The season also featured the debut of first-round quarterback Anthony Richardson, who flashed game-changing ability in his first 4 starts, only to have his season ended to injury after just 5 weeks. I was pretty shattered because he was my fantasy quarterback. That the Colts would go on to a 6-6 record in their final 12 games with Gardner Minshew at the helm, I think was a testament to the job that Steichen was able to do on the coaching front. The Colts actually went remarkably unplucked during the offseason. Outside of losing running back Zach Moss to the Bengals, KJ Hamler, the wide receiver to the Bills, and Gardner Minshew to the Raiders, they managed to retain their star wide receiver Michael Pittman Jr. on a 4-year deal, as well as defensive end Tyquan Lewis, defensive tackle Grover Stewart, cornerback Kenny Moore, and safety Julian Blackmon. So they retained all of those players. In addition to those pieces retained, the Colts bring in Miami Dolphins defensive tackle Raekwon Davis. It's unfortunately begun the season on the NFI list due to a high blood pressure issue. That was what I was reading on CBS anyway. And veteran quarterback Joe Flacco from the Browns. So a bit of experience behind Richardson in the QB room. At the draft, the Colts welcomed UCLA defensive lineman Latu Latu in the first round, as well as wide receivers Adonai Mitchell from Texas in the second. Latu was responsible for 35.5 tackles for loss and 24 sacks in 37 games for the Bruins, while Mitchell reeled in 55 catches, 845 yards, and 11 TDs in his final season with the Longhorns. The big question for me around this Colts team is all to do with Anthony Richardson, really. There were flashes there in 2023 of him being a franchise-changing player. But I guess I want to know, are they simply moments of excitement that transcend what his actual potential is? or was he showing what he can be if and when healthy? And I suppose that's the most important part of the question is, can the Colts keep Richardson healthy enough to find out the answer? Watching him in college, he was dynamic, a game-changing player, could lift a team and secure results almost single-handedly. It's harder to do that at the NFL level, but I think he's also paired with a coach and a team in Steichen and the Colts that can really help him excel. He's got Michael Pittman Jr. as a reliable number one pass catcher. Josh Downs and Adonai Mitchell, I think, provide intriguing targets as well. When healthy, Jonathan Taylor is one of the NFL's most damaging running backs. And if the offensive line clicks, this could be an offense that can both grind teams on the ground and damage them through the air. I think I'm going to wait and see what they get out of their defense, but I think there's talent enough to suggest that if they can take a step forward from what they were in 23, and that was a team that managed to go in, 9-8. If Richardson can be what he can be and he stays healthy, I think this Colts team can actually challenge for the division. But it does take health to Richardson and probably a slight improvement from that defense for me. And I'll punt the ball to you. I kept saying handball last week, and Jack rightly pulled me up and said that's not correct parlance here. I will punt the ball to you, David. Jack was going to cover the Jacksonville Jaguars. I wonder if he chose the Jacksonville Jaguars because it has his name in it, Jacksonville. But he's done the notes up for you, so I would love if you could do us the honor and take the Jags for us here.
I'll be happy to. And I actually have a theory about that. I actually think the Jacksonville Jaguars were named after Jack. I think that they did that because they knew that Jack would be doing this, and so they did that.
Absolutely.
They were just not able to keep up with his illness, and so. But yeah, no, So Jacksonville, I think probably is for me the biggest question mark in the division. They were 9-8 last year. They started out smoking. I mean, remember they were at one point 8-3 on the season, and you had Fabio at the helm, and he was doing his thing, and they were doing fine. And then he got injured in that Week 13 game against Cincinnati, and it just that was kind of when things came off the rails for Jacksonville. They finished the season 1-4, and even the very last week of the season, they had a chance to win the division, but then they lost, I believe, at home to Tennessee. That last game of the season, and a game that Tennessee had no business winning, and Tennessee has no business winning any games, but that's another discussion for another day. But a game that Tennessee should not have won, and they, to their credit, they stepped up, and Jacksonville just they had too many holes that day, and it ended up costing them a playoff spot, and 9-8 on the season. And, they made some good moves in the offseason. They picked up Gabriel Davis. And they got, adding him to Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones left the team. And so they had to make that up somewhere. That they did defensively is where they picked up the safety Darnell Savage, and they got Eric Armstead coming in as well. And I think they didn't really, I feel like, and admittedly, I didn't follow the draft this year as closely as I have in years past. And I think a lot of that's just because I think Houston had like 4 picks for the whole draft. It was crazy. But they didn't do much in the draft, but I feel like they didn't have very many picks either. I don't think they had many picks or any picks for like the first 3 rounds. It was kind of wild. But I think for Jacksonville, which team actually are the Jaguars? Are the Jaguars the 8-3 side? Or are they the 1-4 side? And I feel like this year's incarnation of the Jaguars, they could win 11 games. They could win 11 games. I feel like you kind of have Indianapolis maybe as the second best team in the division. I have I have Jacksonville up there. I think that I don't think anyone's going to challenge Houston, but I think Jacksonville, if anyone's going to jump up and get that wild card spot, I think it's going to be Jacksonville. I think that they've got the tools, they've got the youth. If they can keep Trevor Lawrence healthy, and he hasn't proven that he's injury prone or anything. I mean, it happens at the NFL level. You get hit by those big guys, you get hurt. And that's kind of what they do. And so I think that Jacksonville is gonna come in, and I think they're gonna start out on fire again. And can they sustain it? I don't know. I think that they're maybe a step below Houston. I think they're on par, maybe even a half a step ahead of Indianapolis. I think they should be significantly better than Tennessee. But again, it's the NFL. Anything can happen. If you'd have told people that the Cleveland Browns would be in the playoffs, they would have kind of laughed at you a little bit. But and so the NFL, anything can happen. And so I think for Jacksonville, like I said, I've got them. If I had to throw a number at it, I'd say probably 10-7, maybe 11-6. It's a good team. It's a good team. I don't think that they're poised yet to make a deep run, but they've got enough young talent that in the next year or two they will be. And I'll tell you, the AFC South in about 2 years is going to be an absolute juggernaut. It's going to be an absolute juggernaut because Tennessee is going to get up off the mat. They're going to. I love the Callahan hire for them. Yeah. And the rest of the division is getting younger and better. And so I think the AFC South, because the AFC South for years has been a doormat. They're not a doormat anymore. And before too long, they're going to be running the whole show, I think.
It's crazy. You said 10-7, for the Jags, that's the record that won the division last year. I think you'll have to, I think to win the division this year, you'll obviously have to be better than that. We would probably both agree. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that Trevor Lawrence fascinates me because, his last 2 seasons, I think it's about 50 touchdowns, 51 touchdowns and 22 interceptions or something. If you sort of take that Urban Meyer year out of it, that sort of improves his career stats a lot. But it's kind of funny, like there's a scenario where he is the 3rd best QB in his division, which is crazy when he was coming out in the draft and everyone's like, he's the best since Andrew Luck sort of thing. But if Anthony Richardson develops into what I imagine he could be, and if CJ Stroud keeps playing at this level, what we've seen from Trevor Lawrence so far, I would put him as the 3rd best if those 2 things happen.
And I agree with you. And that's not, I'll yes and you here. Yes. And that's not a knock on Trevor Lawrence.
No,
no, that's just a testament to how strong the division is right now. I'm telling you, the AFC South is not the doormat anymore. Not that they used to be as recently as 2 years ago.
So if we were ranking, we come together to pick our standings prediction. I would have the Texans first. Do you have the Texans first?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Is there an obvious 4th for you out of this group?
I have Indianapolis as 4th.
Yep.
And not by a long way, but I've got them at 4th.
I think I'm okay with that. Look, I'd flip-flop between Tennessee and Indy, and it probably all hinges on Anthony Richardson's health. Mm-hmm. And how well Will Levis plays. I think the one difference I would say between the 2 sides is that I think Will Levis has a better surrounding cast right now as it sort of stands. I think the Titans did a lot to try and get better quickly. So look, I'd be happy to say the Colts 4th. Because the caveat for me is I think this is a team that can win the division if, and it's a huge if, if Anthony Richardson's healthy and he sort of not only plays up to the sample size, but improves, which I think he can. So I'm happy with that. So then do we go Jags 2, Titans 3?
That's exactly what I've got. I've got Houston 1, Jacksonville 2, Tennessee 3, and Indianapolis 4.
Yeah. All right. I'm very comfortable with that. I think it's Houston's division to lose. And really, I think if CJ Stroud is healthy and upright on the field, I think they're going to be just incredibly hard to beat, almost irrespective of what happens around him, I suppose. I feel like he's the kind of QB that can overcome a defense that might lag or even an offensive line that might lag a bit, which is really exciting, especially for Texans fans like yourself, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well, and here's something I'm looking at this, and I'm kind of looking at off screen here. I've got my notes. I've got Houston at 14-3 winning the division. Because I've got Jacksonville at 10-7, and I've got Tennessee at 9-8. That could well be enough to have 3 teams in the division in the playoffs. 9-8 could get it done, especially because there are other teams in other divisions that are down. And so I think, I think it's possible that we could see, 3 AFC South teams in the playoffs, which, yes, please.
Well, we were on the cusp of almost having 4 AFC North teams in the running last year before Joe Burrow got injured. It was that was we did end up with 3. The Steelers, Browns, and Ravens all got in, and I believe the Bengals finished last with a winning record of 9-8. So the AFC South is well on its way to becoming one of the most compelling divisions in football. But that will do us for the AFC South. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd hit that subscribe button, we'd really appreciate it. Up next, in the next couple of days, you'll see the AFC West land. So you can look forward to that. Thanks so much for joining me, David. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. And until next time, go and get some football up here.